said, today's meeting is about creating a recovery-friendly workplace. The topic of this meeting arose from two prior forums that the Charles River Rotary held here on addressing the opioid crisis in Metro West. The men and women in my Rotary Club and in many Rotary clubs represented here do not see the opioid crisis or substance use disorder as happening to other people. They do not see it as a challenge facing them or those people. They see it as a challenge for all of us and an opportunity for all of us as community to come together. That being said, as Rotarians, we are humble enough to know that we are not the experts. We need to listen to the amazing people on the front lines who are addressing this crisis every day, and a number of them are in this room, whether it's parents of people recovering from substance use disorder, Natick, whether it's our chief of police or our two main guest speakers who will be delivering content to you today about creating a recovery-friendly workplace, and that's Kelly Joseph at the Framingham Board of Health and the MOPSI grant, and Katie Sugarman from Natick ACTS. And that is why we are here today as Rotarians, because we listen to these experts, we listen to these first responders, and after our last forum this past April, we listened to the parents of young people in recovery, we listened to the experts who address substance use disorder, and those who see success stories in this area. And we listened to businesses and business leaders. What they unanimously told us was that working together with businesses to create recovery-friendly workplaces was critical to creating lasting change. You will hear more about why that is today, this morning. At the same time in our last meeting, business leaders stepped up. Individuals like Mike Hickey of the Natick Board of Selectmen, who's here, offered to see how they could help. Most significantly, Paul Joseph, president of the Metro West Chamber of Commerce, offered to lead a program with us on this topic. This was a breakthrough and leads us to the program and this partnership today. As I said at the beginning, this is an innovative pilot program. It is a first step. It is an introduction to show you how innovative. I just want to ask you, who of the people here today have ever heard of the Recovery Bill of Rights, or have ever seen it? Raise your hands if you've ever seen it. So a couple people. So that's innovation in and of itself. So you have it in front of you. So there are not many programs that are addressing creating a recovery-friendly workplace, and we are honored to be here today to begin. As always, we will follow up and hope that this will lead to future trainings and greater support. We would also like to thank the Metro West Health Foundation and Marty Cohen, who is here as well, who is the president and CEO, who has supported so many of this effort in responding to the opioid crisis, and so much of the innovative work that's going to addressing it. We could not have done any of this, though, without the courageous and innovative leadership of the Metro West Chamber of Commerce. Paul Joseph has taken the lead and done outreach to bring the support to chamber members who make up the Metro West business community, and we're so glad to see so many of you here today. Further, we thank our sponsors for supporting today's event, Rotary Club of Natick, as I mentioned, for their lead support, Needham Bank, Spark Kindness, and Charles River Rotary. In conclusion, we welcome members of the Metro West Chamber of Commerce today and celebrate their efforts in bringing cutting-edge support, awareness, and resources to businesses and their employees. If employees thrive, we all thrive. With that, I am happy to introduce Paul Joseph, President of the Metro West Chamber.
Thank you, Christine, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. You used the word courageous twice and leadership 3 times, and I want to emphasize that this is, from a business perspective and from a chamber perspective, the opening of hopefully a continuing dialogue. I've prepared a few remarks, but what's interesting is not as far back as, maybe 15 or 20 minutes. I was driving to this event and I was listening to the radio about a woman who was retelling her story. The focus of the piece was on voting, what affects the voters in the upcoming elections. And they actually were speaking to a woman whose son had back pain because of a work-related injury and was basically prescribed Percocet. And I think we all know how this story progresses. So very briefly, she talked about the downward spiral of her son and how difficult it was for her as a mother. And the quote that really just hit me was, that she told her son to get his, life in order after he was stealing from her and stealing from his grandfather and kicked out of a rehabilitation program. A mother can only be as happy as her least happy child. And that really just hit me as a parent when I was coming over here, because really communities can only be as strong as their least happy community members. Businesses can only be as successful as their least successful employee or customer. So when we relate this notion of happiness or this notion of wholeness to the community at large, I think there's a lot to be said for the opportunity that we have for business to help be part of the solution. I appreciate the opportunity to have invited our membership to be here. I think we have a lot to learn, and please excuse my laptop and my typing here. I'm learning, I'm not doing email up here. I'm really taking notes, and I'm really trying to develop an active form of listening from this exercise. I think it's important to hear from the experts, both from the inside of the organization, what can you as employers do to improve your role as a supportive employer? What can you do to protect yourself as an employer from the risks that addiction has in the workplace, and what can you do to forward services and opportunities for employees that are in recovery or their family members that might be impacted by addiction to provide a supportive work environment, because that's how we grow as a community, and that's how we grow as an economy. So I really have very few words to add here other than my thanks, appreciation for the kind words of leadership, but leadership is done by example, and a Chamber of Commerce is a community of business members that come together to hopefully create a greater good, not just for economic power, but for social good. So I look at today's program as a start of hopefully a years-long dialogue about what we can do better. I'll conclude by just one more story that I think was also impactful to the urgency to participate in this program. Local community was talking about its downtown area and how difficult time some of the businesses, small businesses, were having, because the homeless population had been displaced. And there were a lot of people in recovery and had no place to go during the daytime. So there were more increase of police calls, and there was an increase in customers saying, I was afraid to go into your store because of people standing outside of the door. And so this is, again, a systemic symptom of what happens when we don't invest in solutions together, when we don't invest in healthcare, when we don't invest in the behavioral health support services. I know at the last program we had the CEO of Metro West Medical Center talking about the behavioral health programs that they have in place and some of the services that they offer, in some cases at the cost of their success metrics, because it's a focus on healing the whole person. Those whole people are part of our community. So with that, I want to turn things over. He's our next speaker. I don't have the agenda in front of me, so will that be to Tim? Tim Van Dyke from Bowditch and Dewey, who will talk about creating that recovery-friendly environment in the enterprise. So thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity.
Good morning, everybody. I'm delighted and honored to be here. I am not a primary responder. I consider myself a secondary or tertiary responder when it comes to the issues of opioid addiction. I have been practicing labor and employment law for about 30 years now, and I would say about 2 years ago I noticed an increase in the number of calls from general counsels and HR professionals who were confronting me with questions about employees and possible opioid addiction in the workplace. And I would say about 2 years ago, those calls were about once a month. Currently, I'm getting about 2 or 3 calls a week from my clients and potential clients about these very issues. So there's no question that we use phrases like, or words like crisis and epidemic, but they really do apply in this particular instance. Certainly from an employer's perspective, there are a number of reasons why they need to address this issue. Obviously, it's a health and safety issue for their employees. If the issue doesn't get addressed, it's going to translate into higher healthcare expenses, higher rates of absenteeism for employees, obviously reductions in job productivity, increased workers' compensation claims and disability claims, and safety issues in the workplace. So there are a host of reasons why employers want to take an active approach to addressing I'm here to learn as much as anybody. Every situation is unique. Every employee is a snowflake, and every situation is different. And I have found that with respect to most of the clients that I deal with, there is a protectionism. They want to help their employees, but they want to do it the right way. And as I'll get to later in my remarks, it can be a bit of a sticky wicket for employers when they deal with employees who they think may have a drug addiction. But there are certain very concrete things that employers can do, not only to protect themselves, but also to protect their employees. And I would say the first among them is to create a very detailed workplace drug policy. By the way, an article should have been distributed which goes through most of this stuff, so don't feel compelled to take notes on it.
Can you hear back there well? Is it harder to, okay, yeah, I think maybe, I think this is the sound of here.
Sure. Can people hear me better now? Is that better? Okay. Feel free to raise your hand if you're not hearing me. And also, if you have any questions along the way, please feel free to let me know. In the past, I think a lot of employers simply had boilerplate language in their policies. You know, we don't tolerate drugs in the workplace. That needs to change. If employers are really serious about trying to tackle this problem, they should look at their workplace policies and make sure there is a specific prohibition in there on illegal or unauthorized use of prescription drugs. They should also be clear in their policies as to when and how they are going to implement drug testing. They should outline procedures for when they believe reasonable suspicion exists for drug use in the workplace. They should encourage treatment in their policies and let employees know that if they think they have a problem, that the employer will support a recovery. But employees need to know that disciplinary action is going to take place if performance is affected or if the employee becomes a safety risk. So it's sort of a tough love message in terms of the policy. Obviously, this issue isn't going to get cured without expenditure of resources and money. Employers, if they don't already, should consider offering insurance coverage which covers treatment for opioid addiction, and they should offer employee assistance programs, again, if they can afford it. They should consider offering health benefits that cover comprehensive coverage for substance abuse disorders, and that includes not just initial treatment, but also counseling and aftercare treatment. They should also, in terms of the employee assistance programs, employees should know that that's confidential, that they have confidential access to screening and treatment resources. And they should also make sure that the employees are aware of the resources that are available to them. And that can be made, employees can be made aware of that through the policies. One thing that I really am encouraging my clients to do is to take a proactive approach with respect to mandatory training on this issue. And particularly in certain fields like manufacturing and construction, where I think opioid use and addiction is more prevalent. And when I say mandatory training, I don't do training now unless I have the CEO's buy-in that he or she is going to be there at the training and actively participating in the training. Because I can only do so much, but if the CEO or the president is there, it just sets the tone for the rest of the meeting. And it demonstrates, I think, to the employees that the company really does care about this issue and wants to do something about it. So I'm encouraging all of my clients to consider mandatory training for substance abuse and the dangers of opioid addiction. There also needs to be some training, at least at the supervisory level, about identifying impaired behavior and warning signs of opioid addiction. Is there increased absenteeism by the employee? Does the employee nod off during work? Are there mood swings during work? Things like that. But I'm also telling my clients not to try to diagnose the problem. And that's a real concern, because sometimes a paternalism sets in, and the client thinks they know what the problem is when they don't. The employer needs to know that that if they do try to diagnose the problem themselves, they may get in trouble, and I'll get into that in a little bit. What they should do, though, is if they perceive there to be a problem, is to refer the employee to some sort of an employee assistance program, and let the employees know that the employer has every right to engage in drug testing if the employer has reasonable suspicion that the employee is taking opioids. And obviously, if there's a safety issue, for example, construction work, that kind of thing, driving, you have to remove the employee. You have to put safety first, and it's not just the employee's safety, but it's the safety of other employees who may be affected. Another thing that I encourage employers to do is to implement drug testing, again, depending upon the nature of the work that the employer does. It can be a valuable tool in preventing drug-related incidents. And you want to ensure, obviously, that your drug tests include screening for opioids and related compounds. Make sure that your employees are aware and are notified of what your drug policy is, and contemplates when the testing may be used. One thing to note is that in 2016, there was an OSHA rule which provided that employers may not automatically require drug tests after a workplace injury, but may only do so where there is a reasonable possibility that drug use may have been a contributing factor in the incident. So it's not an automatic. And these phrases like reasonable possibility and contributing factor are phrases that the courts wrestle with and lawyers wrestle with all the time, and every situation is different. The last thing I'll talk about is ADA compliance. So the Americans with Disabilities Act protects people with disabilities in the workplace, and the lawful use of prescription medications or substance abuse treatment may implicate the ADA and other laws. I always counsel my clients to tread lightly when it comes to disability issues. Employers are obligated under the law to reasonably accommodate such usage. So if you have employees who are in a treatment program or are lawfully using prescription drugs for a disability, you have an obligation to reasonably accommodate those things. And again, that may depend on what constitutes reasonable accommodation is going to depend upon the facts and circumstances of the case. But it may add cost to your operations. Also, there's the Family Medical Leave Act, which provides 12 weeks of leave to receive treatment for a serious health condition, which would obviously include substance abuse. But the FMLA does not cover the usage itself. In other words, an employee can't take 12 weeks of leave because they're unlawfully using opioids. They can get the 12 weeks of leave for the treatment. That's all I have. Any questions?
I have a question about the employers, or do you have to have a certain number of
Certain number of
employees?
employees,
what
yeah,
that
but it's a fairly low number. I think it's 15. Yeah, and the FMLA is for employers with 50 employees or more.
Can I go back to drug testing?
Yes,
Specifically statement you made about the 2016 OSHA rule.
yes.
Does that mean, even if you have a comprehensive policy, can your policy, you say your policy cannot include automatic drug testing for certain accidents?
Well, it depends. The DOT, for example, Department of Transportation, if you're driving a truck, there are certain industries where you can do it automatically. If a safety issue is implicated, generally speaking, then drug testing is okay. But there has to be a safety issue involved.
Okay, so if you develop a policy, and your policy is comprehensive, and you put that in your policy, certain types of accidents,
Yep.
say a crash, motor vehicle crash.
Just hypothetically.
Hypothetically. I'd say that the 2016 OSHA rules that you cannot have that in your policy now?
That's a very good question. I think the policy would need to include the language in the OSHA regulation, so
Just
reasonable possibility. And that has been interpreted fairly broadly. But again, that's an open issue. Yeah. It's a good question. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was, I think, very informative, and we will be following up with all the registrants. The article that Mr. Van Dyke shared, we'll send that link to you and also to his bio as well. I'm now going to introduce our fellow Charles River Rotarian who is going to introduce our next speaker, John Featherston.
Well, good morning, everybody. I'll be real brief. A couple things. I am a proud member and very proud of President Guthrie for this meeting that she's done here today. She's done a great job. I think she deserves a round of applause. And not only am I a proud member of Charles River Rotary, I'm actually also the chairman of the Board of Health in the town of Ashland. And I want to give another great shout out to Kelly Joseph and Jim White, because the work that they've done on Narcan and leading up to our next speaker here, I think, the community doesn't know what heroes these two people are. So if you can give them a round of applause. And I've been blessed and honored to work both in the Trump administration and in Governor Baker's administration on the opioid crisis. And I had a lot more hair when I first started. Because I found that nothing is more aggravating than when you can change a person's, like my view of the opioid crisis. I used to think the opioid crisis was, well, that's their problem. They're drug addicts, that's their problem, that's the choice that they've made. I've made a total 180 reverse on this. This is the biggest health crisis of our lifetime. And we're either going to complain about it or we're going to fix it. And one of the frustrations that I've seen in working is, when is somebody going to step up and be a leader on this issue and stop talking about it and doing something about it? The good news is that hero is here today. Dr. Ken Duckworth from Blue Cross and Blue Shield is going to bring credibility to this issue. Somebody needed to step up and lead on this issue. And what Dr. Duckworth has worked with the most credible of credible organizations, Blue Cross and Blue Shield, I think is going to expose this problem. It's going to encourage the workplace to support this problem. And it's with great honor that I introduce Dr. Ken Duckworth from Blue Cross and Blue Shield.
What did you say? Well, we were introduced like that. My father would like that introduction. My mother would believe it. I just want to say how much progress we're making, that you have put together this session. Because the workplace is the next frontier. It truly is an untapped resource in this profound public health crisis. And I want to salute all of you for engaging in this, for getting up early and spending some time on the employer side. I want to talk a little bit, I'm going to take a step back before I do this little presentation. Blue Cross has done a lot in this space. You might know we were the people that upset the doctors by making it hard to overprescribe medications. That initiative was later signed into law by the governor. I'm happy to say the Mass Medical Society was on a stage with the governor. So in the 3 years that we had engaged with them, or 2 years, they had come around to the idea that their autonomy was not quite as important as their need to not contribute to this crisis. Everything in this area can be thought of as prevention, intervention, treatment, and recovery. So this is a public health framework that's on the DPH website. So somebody has an idea, I think about it, is this prevention? Is this intervention? Is this treatment, or this recovery? In short, what I've done with all of my colleagues, this is not me, this is a team effort, is we've made it difficult to overprescribe the meds, and we've made it really easy to get treatment. That's essentially the narrative from Blue Cross. Prevention, of course, is thinking about workplace culture, seeking help at work. So with that in mind, I'm going to move from the prevention, overprescribing, to just describe briefly in treatment. We've eliminated the copay, the deductible for methadone. Use is up about 600%. That's exactly what should be happening. People should not be inconvenienced by a daily copay. Again, nobody intentionally did that, but I think, oh, it's a medical benefit, it has a copay. I don't think anybody took a step back and said, you know, you have to go every single day. There's no other treatment like that, right? That you have to go 365 days a year. We eliminated the prior auth for Suboxone, which is the outpatient medication you take once a day. Over 16 milligrams, you still have to chat with one of our people because there is a risk of diversion. These aren't so simple. We eliminated the copay for Narcan. I want to be talking more about Narcan, and thank you for the work you've done on that already. We've eliminated the conversation between anybody in an emergency room and the health plan if you need to send a person to treatment for psychiatric or detox. So you have to call us and ask us, and that's an application of mental health parity. People have a compound fracture in their femur. Nobody has to call the health plan and ask them, gee, how compound is the fracture? Do you think they could be handled at home? This is the idea is this is an identical application of a health benefit. That's why I'm proud to work at Blue Cross, because that was my argument. And I said, you know, I don't think people should be calling us and asking us until you have people calling you and asking you, how big is this heart attack, right? And then somebody at a distant phone call would be arguing with you. That is the experience of the average person working in the substance use world or the mental health world in emergency rooms right now across the Commonwealth. I just want you to know that. We are outliers. It's very unusual that you get hugs from working at a health plan. But when I talk to psychiatric residents who are actually doing this work, they're like, Ken, are you part of this Blue Cross Don't Bother Us thing? Yes, I am. Oh my God. So, anyway, it's very cute. Not a lot of love for health plans as a general rule. I freely admit that. I've done a lot of community mental health. I have friends in the field, so I'm aware. Okay, on to what I wanted to talk about. That's all background. Blue Cross is fully engaged in this and will continue to be engaged in this. I was in Philadelphia visiting my family, and I read an article in the Philadelphia Inquirer that librarians were reversing overdoses in the public bathrooms of Philadelphia. I thought if librarians can do this, anybody can do this, actually. So knowing that I work at a progressive organization that's already let me do all these other things, I come back and I say, why don't we make Narcan super easy to get, like eliminating the copay? Why don't we pick some of our accounts and work with their employer culture to see what they want to do around having Narcan? And we picked 5 organizations that we're working with. So as was mentioned earlier, the construction trade industry is a high-risk area. The carpenters, Shawmut Construction, are working with us. The city of Brockton, an incredibly progressive place, which is doing remarkable things. They are quite far ahead. The town of Ware, which I don't know if they're in Central Mass or Western Mass. I've asked 3 people in Ware, you know, where is it, right? You know, is it Central Mass? No, we're definitely not Central Mass. Okay. I'm from Roslindale. I'm easy, we're good. And we decided to do it with our own Blue Cross employees. And I want to tell you a little bit about that effort. So the idea is the use cases are first responder emergencies. So this would be if you do CPR and you have a defibrillator, you also have Narcan. So this is going to be in the municipal buildings, libraries, pools of the city of Brockton, the town of Ware. If you're on a construction site and you have high risk, you might want to have stewards or leaders who are aware of how to use Narcan. And if you're at Blue Cross, the risk case is not public bathrooms and it's not injury. It's that we have human beings. And human beings have people they love who have addiction or they have it themselves. So we've run these little trainings where we have master trainers from the Department of Public Health show you how to administer Narcan in our groovy little kit. 2 doses, how to recognize someone, when to call 911, a mask, gloves if you're interested. And what I've been impressed by is we've had about 150 people from Blue Cross sign up. We don't have public bathrooms. We don't have construction sites. Some might say we shuffle paper, right? There's not a lot of workplace injuries in that way. But I think what we found is by creating the opening to the idea that you might have someone in your life, this is a common problem. Physicians started it, there's no question about that, but version 2.0 is fentanyl, and what comes through the mailbox, right, is it's more complicated than it used to be, and it's killing our citizens. We have to be engaged in this. So this Thursday, I pitched a related event, which was people in recovery at Blue Cross talking about their experience of being in recovery. So now you're into the workplace culture piece of this. So maybe 150 people will walk away with 2 Narcan doses, knowledge of how to train it, or somebody they love, or somebody in their near surroundings. But I think also by having the CEO of Blue Cross and a series of people who are in recovery talk about their experience, we're just putting this on the map as this is an ordinary human problem. We could have a session on diabetes, but pretty much everybody accepts diabetes is a legitimate, in quotation marks, condition. We did a survey at Blue Cross, and we found there was about 30% of people who still hold this moral view, blame, addict construct, and I was delighted to hear your thinking on this, and I thank you for sharing that. It's common. I wasn't trained too differently than that in medical school. People weren't as sophisticated on the biological drive, how this kind of hijacks your limbic reward system and opiate. And if you are vulnerable to this, you will do what it takes to get it. And so reversing an overdose, Narcan, is only one piece of a larger puzzle. I do think things are changing. I don't hang out with famous people. I don't want to give you the wrong idea. But I had lunch with Demi Lovato. She decided she wanted to be, it's the only thing I've ever done that my daughter thinks is cool. Nothing I've done in my entire life. It's amazing. I was the commissioner of mental health. Yeah, whatever, Dad. So I had lunch with her because she wanted to become a mental health advocate. Of course, Narcan saved her life 3 years later. I met with her 3 years ago. She said to me, nobody comes to my concerts anymore for my music. They come because they want to be heard. Right? She said there's a line of women showing me the cuts on themselves. They're talking about their trauma, their history. That's why she did this mental health tour, right? And of course her vulnerability is profound because many people know with her 70 million Twitter followers, that's more than me, just saying. It's a pretty good poll. About her journey with addiction and overdose and recovery. Narcan did save her life, but the work now begins. And so the question is, how does Narcan and Narcan training provide really not just a window for reversal of overdose, which is important, but how do you leverage this to change the culture where it's acceptable to seek help, where managers are trained to identify and recognize problems. Do any of you know of the Graken Center work on this piece? How to change culture, how to write policies, how to design benefits. I think this is a profound piece of work they've done that is in concert with us. And I just want to stop by saying, I'm so grateful that you're doing this. I think you're right on the beam of where we need to go. A progressive health plan makes it easy for people to get care, but if they don't feel safe in their employer group, if they don't feel that they can ask for accommodation, if they don't feel that it's okay to have this condition, they're unlikely to get the help they need. So I thank you for having me. And who's next? All right.
Thank you so much, Dr. Duckworth. I feel so deeply honored to be in this room with truly innovative people who are doing, and I see Cheryl Lucenta, who we'll be introducing later, she is a hero as well, who are doing this work to to change systems, to eliminate the stigma and shame, to increase parity so that people aren't looking as this disease as something different than other diseases like diabetes and heart attacks. So I just want to say that I'm really grateful for everybody who's here today. And along those lines, and also just to know somebody who's had lunch with Demi Lovato.
That's my only claim to fame.
Just saying. But along the lines of heroes in our community, I want to now introduce this part of the program that's really going to be a mini training, really a beginning. Because I think we've set the frame of why this is important, why this is cutting edge, why this is the next frontier. And if you all know anything about Rotary and about the Metro West Chamber, we will keep moving forward. This isn't the end, this is the beginning. We're doers. So, but I want to begin today with this, like I said, a mini training with two people in our community who were referenced before, who are doing this work on a daily basis. And I'm going to begin with Katie Sugarman, who's going to have to leave at 8:30, who she has prior commitments, and we're so happy that she's here today. Katie has done this work in the Natick community for 7 years. How long?
It'll be 5 years.
5 years, okay. She's done 7 years worth of work. It's true, actually. She is a prevention specialist, and she is with Natick ACTS and Natick Together for Youth. She has a number of titles. I've had the privilege and honor of working with her in the work that she's done town-wide in the Natick community. So she is going to be talking about specifically how we do this as employers and community members. How do we create a recovery-friendly workplace? How do we begin? And then after that, we'll be hearing from Kelly Joseph from the MOPC grant, which is the Metro West Opioid Abuse Prevention Collaborative. And so she'll be speaking after Katie, but first I want to introduce Katie Sugarman from Natick ACTS.
Good morning. Thank you for that introduction, Christine. And I do apologize for having to sneak out early. The life of a working parent, I have to make it to a 9 a.m. parent-teacher conference, so I apologize. I do want to preface my comments by just acknowledging a lot of what's already been said, which is that this is not easy. We are very much at the forefront of a conversation that I think is starting to happen in Massachusetts. Some states that are addressing the opioid crisis have put a lot of their resources in this particular issue, and Massachusetts is ahead on other issues. But we're really just starting this conversation, I feel, as a Commonwealth, and I see the Metro West dialogue that's happening as being at the cutting edge of that conversation statewide. So I want to acknowledge that there isn't a clear roadmap for us, that it's going to take all of us working together to really, I mean, there's some best practices out there for sure, but all of us working together is really going to be key. And I mean, actually, there's a whole new culture in the recovery community about even talking about these things so publicly. So for those of us who are still shifting our mindsets about what it means to have a substance use disorder, what it means to struggle with addiction, a lot of our memories, the first thoughts that might come to our minds are 12-step groups, AA meetings, NA meetings, in basements of churches and that sort of thing. And 12-step groups are still hugely important to our recovery community. They have a very important role to play in recovery for many, many people. But a lot of the talk about how we even frame the recovery conversation has always been focused on anonymity. Let's not talk about this. Let's make sure that we protect people's privacy. That we don't acknowledge ourselves as somebody dealing with an alcohol use disorder or an opioid use disorder, unless we're in the safety of our meetings. And in those meetings, we might just use our first name and no other identifying information. If that's the course of recovery that somebody defines for themselves, that's fabulous. That's totally fine. But there's been a whole new movement over the past 10 years or so, in part because of the opioid crisis, and in part because I think a younger generation of people in recovery have kind of recognized that, you know what, we have power when we all come together. There are so many more people experiencing substance use disorders than anybody realizes, and as long as we remain anonymous, the reality of substance use disorder, the reality that it happens in the home next door to you, or that it could be happening in your child's bedroom, that story gets stifled. And so a lot of the language around recovery, a lot of the discussion about making our workplaces and our communities more recovery friendly, it's all fairly new for a lot of us. So we're kind of in this together, learning together, and the fact that you're all here this morning with an open mind about this, I think is great. So we're going to make this a little interactive. I'm going to put a question to the group to see if we're all awake. So there's actually, as I was kind of looking across a lot of different recovery organizations and looking at some of the resources out there, somebody had a quote that I really appreciated, and I wanted to kind of hear from the group what your reactions are to this. The quote is, "You don't recover from an addiction by stopping using. You recover by creating a new life where it's easier not to use." So I'm curious, what do folks in this room think a person might need in order to be successful in recovery? What do you think makes it easier to not use?
Support group.
Support group, absolutely. So support group, are we thinking like a formal support group, or just support in any sense of any definition of it?
Really any definition, just a group that's there for when they need it.
Absolutely, you need a strong support network, definitely, yes.
Resources.
Resources, what kinds of resources are you thinking?
Well, like the Narcan kit that you're talking about, and just places to go, people to see, psychotherapists, psychologists, people like that.
Absolutely, so making sure that those resources are like visible, tangible, you know kind of who some of the point people are, or who some of the point organizations are that you could go to for that support, absolutely.
A job.
A job, it gets that simple, doesn't it? Absolutely, a job. Hence why we're all here today. Think about some of those basic needs. What are some of the other basic needs that we all need as human beings?
To be valued, to have a purpose and be valued.
Absolutely, to feel valued, to feel like you have purpose. Any other thoughts?
You need, really, it's just that when you're talking about basics, you're talking about your home, like a place to be, you're talking about food and shelter, and just those very basic human needs that everyone needs as they're trying to live through their life.
Absolutely. Housing and transportation are two of the biggest challenges that people in recovery experience. And we know that that's a challenge here in Metro West in general, right? Transportation, I'm looking at Paul nodding his head here. Transportation is one of the recurring conversations that we have here in Metro West across a lot of different demographics, but for people in recovery, it can be a significant challenge. I mean, literally not having access to safe and reliable transportation could mean the difference between getting to your job or getting to your court appointment on time and fulfilling your obligations, practicing the accountability that's really key to recovery, versus trying to hail a ride from somebody that you used to use with because you're trying to make it to the appointment, but now you're riding with someone who maybe presents a little bit of a challenge or a trigger to you because this is somebody you used with, this is somebody who you're comfortable with, but who maybe being around that person is going to could create a stumbling block for you. And so it can be that simple that something like transportation could really create a hang-up for you. Or if you missed that court appointment and now there's some sort of sanction because you missed the court appointment, it's very easy to fall back into this mindset of, well, why even bother? Why even try? Like, I tried to do the right thing and I got screwed. So it's like, why would I feel compelled to put myself out there again to try again? And so we still need to make sure that we as employers, as community members, are always reiterating the importance of accountability when we're working with people in recovery, but we're also acknowledging that it often takes twice or maybe even 3 times as much energy to get certain things accomplished or certain things done than it does for the rest of us who maybe, for whom transportation, housing, basic needs are not very challenging. When we're talking about recovery in the workplace, I want to acknowledge too that we are talking about some very complicated issues. We're talking about if we're encouraging folks to hire people in recovery, folks in recovery may not have the most stellar queries when you do a query check. There may be some very spotty employment or educational histories. And so I'm certainly not going to pretend that this is something where, you know, if you're a good employer, you're going to hire folks in recovery and act like that's something simple. This is something that is going to have to be done on a case-by-case basis. Every organization is going to have to look inward at their own organizational policies and practices. And my recommendation would be, if you're a large enough organization to actually pull together a work group or a task force or something like that, where you've got legal, you've got HR, and you actually invite employees in recovery or family members of people in recovery to be a part of that conversation, I think that you'll find that the policies and practices that you develop will be all the more in touch with reality, and will also help, to go back to what Dr. Duckworth was saying, kind of shifting culture within an organization. If people who work for an organization feel like this topic is not something that has to happen, that conversations don't happen in the shadows, that people are having these conversations openly and freely, that a principle or priority of the organization is to support people in recovery, not only is that going to shift the way you enact hiring practices and maybe disciplinary practices too, if there is a reason, you know, if somebody does have test positively for a substance on a drug screen, but it's going to make people more likely to reach out for help too. You know, a lot of times employee assistance programs are underutilized because people either don't know they exist, they're not well publicized within organizations, or some people still have concerns that, oh, well, my organization is going to find out that I called the EAP for a substance use related matter or a mental health related matter. Having open conversations, making sure that that kind of information is posted publicly, and creating some of these work groups helps to kind of promote a culture where this is something that the organization talks about very freely. I want to also just kind of recognize just how, I mentioned earlier how pervasive this issue is in our communities, but a few stats to back that up. Substance use disorders affect 20.8 million Americans, which is almost 8% of the adult and teen population in our country. When you include family members of those affected, we're talking about a third of the US population. So we're not just talking about the individual with the substance use disorder, but the people in their orbit, their family members and close friends. 75% of people who have substance use disorders are still in the workforce. So that's a substantial percentage of people that are in your workplaces every single day who do experience substance use disorders. And it's estimated that the yearly economic impact of of substance use disorder impacts about it's about $442 billion annually, the cost to our employers. A lot of that is due to absenteeism, increased healthcare expenses, and also loss of productivity. So in addition to creating an internal work group or task force like I suggested, I want to also put out a few of the suggestions that are right on this handout that was put out there, and some of these also call upon some of the suggestions that Dr. Duckworth mentioned. But one of them is to prepare for the possibility of an overdose. If you have people in your business as employees or as customers who are in recovery, the great news is that they're in recovery. The challenge is that they're also at higher risk for an overdose if they do relapse. And we do know that that's one of the significant contributing factors to the overdoses that we're seeing as a Commonwealth. So somebody who is in recovery has a lower tolerance level, and if they relapse and they use at a similar rate as to what they had been using before they got into recovery, or they try something, I mean, frankly, if anybody's in recovery right now and was using heroin 3 years ago and relapses now, they're not getting heroin. They're getting primarily fentanyl, which is much stronger than heroin. And so relapse is very much a part of recovery for most people, and so we need to be prepared to save a life. Absolutely, our first responders are amazing to getting to the scene of an emergency very quickly, but every minute of oxygen deprivation counts, and that's what we're talking about when we're talking about opioid overdose, that actually the body is forgetting to breathe. And so if we have Narcan, if we have the ability to recognize the signs of an overdose, to act promptly and to act quickly, we have the opportunity to increase the likelihood that that person will not only survive the overdose, but survive the overdose with as little impairment as possible, because that is one of the other side effects, is that sometimes even if somebody does survive an overdose, if that oxygen deprivation has happened for a long enough period of time, that they could actually lose mobility in limbs or have some cognitive impairments and so on and so forth. So making sure that your workplace is ready for an overdose and ready to respond. Dr. Duckworth, we may have shared notes before this, I don't know, because we're going to touch upon a few of the same things, but they're not out on your table, but on the table out when you walk outside of the store, we have a copy of the Graken Center for Addictions Stigma-Free Pledge. This is actually downloadable online, free to anyone to use. They even leave a nice little blank area for you to throw your logo right on there. And it has examples of what we consider now to be non-stigmatizing language. So even language like substance abuse, that is no longer the language that we use when we're talking about a substance use disorder. The word abuse obviously has a lot of negative connotations to it, and so now we talk about addiction happening on a continuum of a substance use disorder, and you could have some of that disorder could be a mild substance use disorder, or it could be a severe one. We don't talk about people as junkies. Even calling people addicts is something that is leaving our vernacular around this language, but we talk about people who have substance use disorders. So they're people first, and their condition or the disorder that they're struggling with is secondary. They're a person who is experiencing this substance use disorder. Talking about people as being clean. Oh yeah, he's clean and sober now. The opposite of clean is what? Dirty. So if we're talking about people as like, oh yeah, he's clean, good for him, it suggests that he was dirty at one point. And we're not talking, we don't want to create the generation of lepers where we're afraid to talk about touch, be around people who have substance use disorders. So we talk about them as being in recovery from their substance use disorder. So some of these are examples are right on the Graken Center for Addiction pledge. If you think, oh, well, I don't work in the treatment field, I don't work in the medical field, I'm probably not going to have much reason to educate my employees about this language. To go back to the example that was used earlier, you could have folks hanging out around your business, out in front of your business, in the block of your business who experience substance use disorders, and very casually some of this language creeps into our workplaces very easily. When somebody's complaining about the junkie around the corner who is blocking them from getting into the business. Being able to use more person-centered language can really make a difference, and it models for other people how we perceive this issue. And the last thing I'm going to just mention is to really think about how you encourage people to connect in your workplace. Think about having social events for your staff that are not focused on substance use. That sounds like it's very common knowledge, but if you think about how many of our businesses and workplaces often do a lot of their social connection in settings where alcohol is very prominent, whether it's in restaurant or bar situations after 5 o'clock. Oh, everyone's meeting down there at 5:30. You gotta be there. You're gonna miss your opportunity to hang out with the group. Sometimes there's this informal pressure to make sure that you're building connections with your fellow employees outside of the office in these settings where alcohol is very prominent. Think of what that's like for a person in recovery. Now, we don't want to sterilize their environment. They do have to acclimate. Somebody who's in recovery has to acclimate to the world around them, where substance use is certainly a part of life. But if alcohol is a primary mobilizing factor for how your team connects with each other, that could really set up a person in recovery to fail. Either because they don't get the opportunity to build the connections that are so important to their work, or because they have to jeopardize their recovery in order to make those connections. So I ask you to kind of think about some of those factors as you make these decisions. But I'm going to turn it now over, because I think went over time, so I apologize. I am going to turn it over to Kelly Joseph, who is an amazing colleague who's going to help us talk a little bit about how we can do this on a regional basis.
Good morning. morning. I'm not worried about people not being able to hear me because I tend to project and I'm a little bit loud, so hopefully I don't blow anybody out the room. So again, just thank you to Christine and the Charles River Rotary and the Chamber as well for bringing together this event today. As Christine mentioned when she opened up the conversation today, this is a secondary or even tertiary event that has been focused on opioids and how do we take action in our community. So I just want to recognize Paul Joseph, no relation, but Paul Joseph at the Chamber, because I remember when we had an event here in April, he kind of stood up at the end and said, I need one of these for the Chamber. I need to bring this conversation and this education to the business community, and that's the type of leadership that I think I heard Tim and Ken and obviously Katie talk about that is really necessary to propel this work forward. So I'm happy to be invited back to speak today, and I think I have the easy portion. I think Katie just did a really excellent job of providing some context for how we can act now, and I just get to kind of round out the conversation. So again, the easy portion of the meeting today for me. So as Christine mentioned, I work at the Framingham Health Department, and I coordinate a regional opioid prevention grant. And that is a partnership between 4 communities, Ashland, Framingham, Hudson, and Natick, all of which I see represented in a different capacity in this room today, which is really excellent. There are 19 other regional MOPCs across the Commonwealth, and our funding comes from the Department of Public Health, Bureau of Substance Abuse Services, so just wanted to note that. Our coalition is a partnership of stakeholders across various different sectors, and we mobilize to address issues related to opioid use, prevention. We've been focused a lot namely on the effects of opioid use, right? Overdoses and unfortunately overdose deaths. But fundamentally as a group, we recognize that addiction is a disease. And that we're committed to supporting members of our community at all stages of their addiction and recovery, which really leads to this conversation today. The ability to keep employment has been for a long time one of the most important factors that will determine whether or not somebody is able to maintain their recovery. Employment helps people in recovery by giving them a steady and legitimate source of income, which is incredibly important, provides stability, consistency, and predictability to their lives. It offers the person a way to constructively use their time, idle hands, devil's workshop, if that's the old saying. It also provides them a sense of self-esteem and self-confidence to really start rebuilding their sense of self-worth after struggling with addiction. And lastly, it provides the ability for them to positively contribute to their community, which I just want to reinforce as being such a significant factor to rejoin a community after being isolated for quite a significant period of time. So needless to say, this is a really, really important conversation that we're having today. You heard Katie, as I'm pointing over to where she was sitting, talk about some of the concrete action steps that we can all take today, but I want to talk just for a moment about some of the longer term things that are necessary to move this effort forward. You all have this at your table as well. I'm going to have you look at this and maybe put some marks on this in a second so people can rifle through and find this. It says building a recovery-friendly workplace, where to start. So again, as we talk about longer term necessary steps that need to be taken, first I just want to highlight the need to mobilize and advocate. So advocacy at the state level is something that is incredibly necessary to be able to develop a recovery-friendly workplace model. So if you are not familiar with the model in New Hampshire, and now it's kind of spread throughout a number of other states, including Rhode Island, I would encourage you to take a look at that. Provide some really concrete, again, action steps that businesses can take. This effort is gaining steam, this recovery-friendly workplaces, because it's beneficial, right? It provides the possibility for tax incentives, so it's good for business. For those people who are motivated by wanting to do something good in the face of this devastating public health crisis, it gives you an opportunity to do that. And then lastly, for the job seeker, these efforts for recovery-friendly workplaces will expand their possibility of successfully re-entering the workforce. So I want to encourage folks to think through if there's ways that you can mobilize and advocate. And again, I think you have a great resource right here with the Chamber of Commerce to be able to mobilize some of these efforts within the business community of Metro West. And secondly is to partner with us. I talked a little bit at the onset that we have a coalition and an infrastructure that includes a number of different sectors, but we can't do this alone. And certainly we can't support the business community without the opinion and the perspective of the business community. So we really need your help to identify what are the needs, what are the goals, and then how can we get you there? How can we support the business community in Metro West to create recovery-friendly workspaces for our people who are coming out of addiction and into their recovery process. So if you're interested in partnering with us, I would encourage you to come talk to me after the event, and we can find a way to move things forward with this conversation. So as I mentioned, you have this worksheet in front of you, so I want to encourage everyone to do a couple things right now. I always think I know if a meeting is successful if I have something tangible to do when I walk out the door. Sometimes it's small, sometimes it's big, sometimes it's a laundry list that I hope to delegate off to other people, but if I have something tangible. So you have this sheet in front of you, so I want everyone to do two things, and you can do this as I'm talking. First is star anything that you think you can do now, whether that's in your business, whether that's in your home life, what is within your sphere of influence for you to be able to tangibly do now. Sometimes we can't do things in the moment, right, because we need buy-in from leadership or buy-in from our boss to be able to move things forward, but I am confident that there's at least one thing on this list that everyone thinks that they can do now. And then secondly, I want people to circle anything that you think you need help with. Anything that you think is kind of the lofty goal, we want to get to that point, but I need help. And then I would encourage you to check in with either myself, Christine, or Paul Joseph after this event, because if we get your feedback, what you need help with, we can figure out a way to mobilize to get you that support, right? And then lastly is, again, I'm going to say after this event, but we've had an initiative in the Metro West since I'd say about March, where we offer free Narcan training in our communities, right? So Ashland, Framingham, Hudson, and Natick, and we offer those to businesses. And I think we've had a lot of success at different places like the library. I'll be training the mayor of Framingham in December, at local hotels. We've had businesses come to us and say, we want to be prepared in the event of an emergency, right? So we offer those trainings at your convenience, at your facility. So if you are a member of a business and you have some sort of ability to make decisions for that business and you're interested in getting your staff trained, come talk to me afterwards and we can sign you up and get you in touch with the appropriate municipality. These are initiatives that are run out of our health departments. So if that's something that you want to do, we're happy to meet that need as well. And I just want to leave with a couple of thoughts. So I think we're in frequent, myself, Katie, Jim, are in frequent contacts with our colleagues from around the state. I mentioned that this Metro West MOPSI grant is one of 19. So I meet often with other program coordinators that work in different parts of the Commonwealth. And what I can say is that the fact that this meeting is happening and that you all are in the room shows that the Metro West has the ability to lead on this frontier. This is very new, that the business community is stepping up in a really impactful way right now. So I just want to recognize all of you for being here today, being a part of this important conversation and hopefully partnering with us. With you at the table, I think we really have an opportunity to highlight and be innovative. That is really going to make a difference for people who are really trying to get their lives back on track. So again, I think Metro West has an opportunity to lead, and I'm excited to hopefully support in whatever way makes sense. So thank you for your time today. I appreciate it.
So thank you, Kelly, and you can see this really has just been a lineup of all-stars, and I'm not overstating it. You can just tell each and every one of these speakers is completely committed to this issue and also is offering themselves up to the community to give practical support. I also want to acknowledge again the Metro West Chamber. We wouldn't be here today to be talking about this issue without the leadership of Paul Joseph. And you can see, Kelly Joseph, again no relation, and Katie Sugarman put together this resource, which does have their contact information, but specific steps, and also Kelly's the one who sent me the Recovery Bill of Rights that everybody should have as well. I think that, you know, this, like I said, this is just the beginning. And in this room, we have small business owners, we have town leaders, we have people in human resources, head of human resources for organizations, we have heads of human resource organizations. So leadership in this room that can really create positive change. And we also have leadership from the chamber, and as Paula said to me, you know, the chamber is businesses. It is one and the same. So we are not leaving, we're leaving here today saying that we are going to be here with you, the chamber is going to be here with you, and Kelly Joseph and Katie Sugarman to provide trainings. This is the beginning, and we are willing to walk shoulder to shoulder with you all in this work. And speaking of kind of leadership and moving forward, I want to introduce our next guest. I could go on forever, and we don't have that much time about her. I always do. Cheryl Lucenta is the founder and leader of SOAR NATIC, which stands for Supporting Outreach and Addiction Recovery. She is the mother of somebody who is recovering with substance use disorder. And she has been on the front lines for years in a courageous way, speaking from the perspective of families and individuals who are coping with this issue. Because for many of us, it's not something that we have to think about day in and day out all the time. We have the luxury of thinking about it when we choose to think about it. That's not the same luxury that Cheryl has, and she has stepped out in front, brought a voice to this in our community, and I think probably more than anyone has created positive change. And I am one of her many huge fans. She has many fans, but I'd like to introduce Cheryl Lucenta.
Thank you, Christine. I thought I had a speech, and then while everybody spoke, I made a whole lot more notes, so I hope I could follow my way and say something coherent here. Although the work involved in a successful recovery belongs to the individual, the support network surrounding them makes a difference too. The ways that employers can help in the recovery process is almost limitless. With some creativity and flexibility, any employer can play a role. I have a son that's been working on his recovery for a long time and currently has nearly 6 years of uninterrupted sobriety. I thought I would tell a little bit about my family's personal experience to give you all an example. Years ago, our first effort at recovery began with a visit to the emergency room, an admission to a detox, followed by a professional recommendation that continued inpatient treatment was needed. Our insurance company disagreed and said that until outpatient treatment was tried and failed, inpatient coverage would be denied. You can imagine what I might have said to them on the phone when that happened too. And surprise, he relapsed. As his addiction became even more serious, he began losing jobs. Eventually, a family member got him a few hours a week at his place of employment. It was a family-owned business that's been around for nearly 90 years and employs around 40 people. At the time, it was expected to be temporary, just a few dollars a week to help him keep up with the bills. In other words, so the car wasn't repoed, and I didn't have to come up with the money. Soon a co-worker, a man in recovery himself, recognized that my son was struggling and helped to guide him to some resources. My son entered detox, followed by the path of CSS, then TSS, which are kind of terms you may not all be familiar with, but are one of the recommended paths to recovery. All adding up to about 8 weeks of full-time residential treatment that kept him away from work. With the promise of a job when he was ready, he chose a halfway house that was within walking distance from his place of employment and quickly became a full-time employee. Fast forward several months, and there was a relapse. I imagine most of you have heard that there are many paths to recovery. This time, following detox, he chose medication-assisted treatment. At the beginning, this required daily visits to a clinic, group meetings a couple of times a week, and weekly counseling appointments. Of course, all of this happens during the normal workday. His employer allowed the time off needed without hesitation. This method of treatment can be long, and for my son, it took about 1.5 years. Some of the required visits reduced over time, but it was still a big commitment. And I should add that during all of this time, my son did not have a car or a driver's license. So family members, co-workers, and public transportation were his lifeline to the resources that he needed. He's now a 7-year employee of that company that supported him on the road to recovery. They've shown concern, compassion, and generosity throughout. So I hope some of you can see the type of help you may be able to offer somebody that really needs it. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. Our final speaker today is going to be Mark from Natick Rotary. And as I said before, this event this morning that has brought so much wonderful information, and I'm so grateful to Cheryl for really reminding us why we're all here today at the deepest level of what our goal is. But I have to give credit and thanks to Natick Rotary for the work that they have committed to do as community members. Again, we need the larger community to address this issue. We have our first responders, we have our families who are fighting this battle on a daily basis, but we need the entire community to address it. And Natick Rotary, realized that a few years ago and really stepped up and did specific fundraising around that. A number of Rotary clubs have done that as well. We have members, like I said, of other Rotaries here. But we want to specifically thank and recognize Natick Rotary. And I know that Mark is going to talk about how they've actually helped with the creation of a website in Natick, Natick Acts, which has highlighted some of the insights of Cheryl Lucenta and SOAR, of the police, and all the different members of the Natick Opioid Task Force. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce representative from Natick Rotary, Mark. Thank you.
Hello, how you doing? My name is Mark Hinnegal, and Christine, I don't blame you for not saying my last name.
Yeah.
It's very Let me say it's always hard to follow Cheryl. She's such an inspiration. As Christine said, my name is Mark Hinnegal, member of Natick Rotary, and I'm here today to share the perspective of a concerned community member and business owner in the town of Natick. I've owned and operated a business in Natick for about 15 years now. And about 2 years ago, I've always been connected with the Rotary Club of Natick since I've been in town, but 2 years ago I finally took the pledge and joined Natick Rotary for a number of reasons, but primarily it was for volunteership. It was to get involved and to be active in my community. My community has given me so much, but really it was time to give back and live out service above self. And this, about a year ago, I should say, Natick Rotary put together an opioid committee. And we wanted to really examine kind of and really be part of the solution in responding to the opioid crisis. And we were in a situation that a lot of community members and business owners face today. We had this critical question of how can we turn a desire to help into actual action. And I want to share with you 3 kind of items and lessons learned that we had throughout the process of really turning that kind of desire into action. 3 things. One was to learn. The second was to understand how we were uniquely positioned to help. And the third was how can we bring resources to the table. So the first, to learn. We need to find experts. We're not experts in this. We need to learn, educate ourselves, and understand what the problem was at hand and come to the table with an open mind. And we started this out by really, not thinking we knew the solutions ahead of time. So Eric Lazari, president of Natick Rotary, and his past presidents had invited different speakers to come to our club and to help us learn. And it's an open invitation for anybody in this room to Charles River Rotary or Natick Rotary. Come to one of our meetings. We meet later on today at the Dolphin. You guys meet today, right? Or do you guys meet on
We
Thursday?
meet Thursday.
Okay, so you guys are a little early in the morning.
Yeah.
That's why I'm Natick Rotary. I'm operating solely on coffee right now. I usually get in the office in about an hour. So, you know, really, again, understanding, you know, that this is, there's some learning to be had here. We're not the experts. We opened up lines of communication with the opioid task force and sit on that seat. And really understand that one message that did resonate with me throughout all my work is that this is not a them issue. This is kind of an us issue. So really kind of that learning component. The second was, how are we uniquely positioned to help? You know, this is unique for everybody, right? And for Rotary, we're really good at a couple of different things. You know, it's raising funds and supporting initiatives, right? So fundraising, you know, we can create, you know, ask our community to help us support initiatives. We also looked at raising awareness. As business owners in town, we have a strong network of professionals with different skill sets, right? So everybody has something to offer. Ultimately, that leads us to, how can we bring resources to the table, right? Again, everybody has to do their part. If we understand that this is not a them issue, this is an us issue, we have to all do a part to help you know, solve this crisis. So from a fundraising perspective, we held events. We had February Flurry last year that helped raise some funds. We support opioid task force initiatives. We also started a lend a hand program, which is it offers micro grants to those in recovery, and you know, for things like transportation if they need an Uber or a taxi somewhere. And something that's a little bit more closer to kind of my area of expertise is we work with the opioid task force on a communication strategy, right? So how can we get the word out? How can we help others educate themselves? How can we help others go through this process of learning, of asking themselves how they're uniquely positioned to help, and bring those resources to the table? So working with the opioid task force, we tried to understand what their biggest challenges were. And we helped them brand Natick Acts. NatickActs.org is a resource that we helped them build, working with Katie to package up these resources so that we can open them up to the community and also offer different pathways to volunteership, right? Building resources, website collateral, video messages and support. So another kind of key communications issue that we're working in Natick on is removing the stigma and that we're human first. So we have started to record video messages of support. Now they can be from any member in the community or first responders. So I've sat in Natick Pegasus, the town TV station, and I've seen members of the police department and fire department say that they're human first and they're stigma free. So again, changing that relationship in ways that we can really open up the dialogue and change the relationship towards a path to solution. And our biggest takeaway when looking at how we can volunteer is understanding that, you know, awareness really kind of isn't enough. We need to translate this awareness into action and take a practical approach to get some resources in people's hands. And I want to share kind of one example that I heard from a community forum last week. I met a gentleman who owns, I think it's Bancroft Boxing. Did he speak with you? Okay, so he owns Bancroft Boxing on 135. So again, small business owner in the town of Framingham. He started a program where those in recovery could come on Sundays and get free boxing lessons. They can get free memberships to his gym, right? So it started as one day, and now he said it's on Sundays, it's on Wednesdays, it's on Thursdays. So there's like 3 or 4 days now that he has those in recovery come to the gym, and they have created a culture, and again, a culture of support and a culture of healing. And he's working right now to connect those people in recovery to different resources. So everybody really can do their part if we kind of learn about that issue, understand how we're uniquely positioned to help, because again, everyone does have a part in this solution, and how can we bring those resources to the table, really create action from a desire to act. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Mark. Mark Canagala.
There you go.
And I also want to thank Eric Lazari, who is here, who's the current president of Natick Rotary, and for all of those specific ways that you have gotten involved and worked with the Natick Opioid Task Force. I'd also like to recognize Chief Hicks, who's here, and when Mark was talking about those messages from our leadership in our town and from our Natick police about that people are human first, and this is about support and not stigma. I know that leadership has come from the chief. The chief was our featured speaker in the first of our two forums ago, so I want to recognize his leadership as well. Before we move to Q&A and to people speaking with each other, I also wanted to invite up one of our guests here, Tanya Snyder, who is from Interface, and wanted to connect you with this resource that I sing its praises all over and I have a big mouth, so all over Metro West. I want to recognize also the Metro West Health Foundation, which has funded Interface in communities. Interface Referral Network, if you want to kind of come up, Tanya, is a free referral service that is available to residents of towns. So I know she's going to kind of talk about this, but so it's offered to towns such as residents of Natick and residents of Framingham. This is a free referral service that's available to them. So it does become a bit complicated. If you are a business, you are going to have employees from different towns, and some of them may have Interface available and free to them, and some may not. But I want just, in introducing Tanya, the work that I do with Charles River Rotary, and also as the executive director of Spark Kindness. We have 4,200 members in Natick and beyond. We do a lot of programming around mental health, and it has been such a wonderful resource for us to tell parents and community members about, that there is this free referral service that they can go to. They can get an intake that's free, that is a very thorough intake, and then they get followed up with to see if basically Interface will get back to them with several, ask them what their insurance is, we'll match up providers with their insurance, then we'll follow up with them after that to see how the visit went, and then we'll follow up again to see if they want another, if they need another referral. And again, I'm testifying here, because I have spoken to probably 10 individual community members who have utilized this service and have sung its praises. So, and often in moments in their life in crisis. So in my experience, it is underutilized in communities. So I'm thrilled that she is here, and she has materials in the back that can be not only offered to individuals, but to employers, so that they can offer that to those of their employees that can access the service. So without further ado, Tanya.
Explaining what I do, so I know you want to get to Q&As. I won't take a lot of time. What I would suggest is that you visit me in the back. We also have a website, and I can share a card with that information on it as well. And you can check to see if your employees reside in one of the communities we serve. And if you're from a community we don't serve and you're interested in bringing our resource to all of your residents there, I can speak more about that as well. So I think the key for us in this world is that underlying a lot of substance use disorder is mental health issues. And so we can help with those pieces in terms of connecting people to outpatient mental health resources. When you talk about prevention, I think we live in the world of prevention, and helping people with recovery treatment. So in between, there's a lot of great work that people do in terms of the substance abuse helpline, but we sort of live on either end of that spectrum. But we're happy to help connect connect residents in those subscribing communities with outpatient mental health resources. So again, if you have questions about what communities we're in or bringing us to your community, please come see me in the back. I have lots of resources. I'm happy to share more about them. Thank you so much for having me.
Also, as we mentioned before, and you could hear from what Cheryl said, this substance use disorder not only affects the individuals, but their entire families. So their entire families can access, who need support, can access Interface for referrals. I was going to maybe just turn it over to Paul to maybe with some final thoughts, Paul Joseph from the Metro West Chamber, and if you wanted Paul to open it up for Q&A.
Absolutely. Thank you. So I'll bring it up, but again, I want to thank everybody for being here today. I'm really looking forward to the conversation now in the informal, more Q&A part. I know there are a number of experts in the room. A couple people had to leave. Unfortunately, that if you could add to the conversation, I know a colleague, Sean Marshall from Mass Hire, for example, they're in our office, the Massachusetts Employment Division, that's basically heavily focused on helping prospective employees in recovery and putting programs in place. So many of you in the audience are experts. I was jotting down just several basic ways we can help as a Chamber of Commerce. I mean, we're really a conduit to the businesses. Our members are the chamber itself, so the fact that we can, and I'd like to acknowledge actually a couple of my board members in the room today, Andy Bennett from Alliant HR and Bing Yeo from AFC Urgent Care here in Natick and Marlborough. It's important that we take these words and now put a process in motion. I encourage everyone that is here to reach out to two people that aren't here. We have our annual meeting next week for the Chamber on Thursday night, and you better believe I'll be talking about some of the things I heard tonight in the context of some of the things that we try to provide as shared services in our community. Transportation and housing by far is an important issue for many of our community members, but in particular to those in recovery. We've heard the word lifeline struck me. You know, getting somebody to that job, getting the resources in place. But we have programs like a Transportation Management Association that provides employers with transportation services, including guaranteed ride homes and that type of thing. Maybe we can look at these resources differently under this lens of being a recovery-friendly community. Maybe we can channel rides for specific types of employees, taking advantage of some of the programs of some of these Rotaries, and I'd also like to acknowledge my colleagues from the Framingham Rotary in the room as well, that we have work to do as community members, but we have a lot of resources. Today was a great day. I can't tell you how many pages of notes right now, just in terms of even employers that are putting programs in place. If we know about it, we can amplify that. If we amplify that, we can bring more people to the solution. I know I tried in vain actually to hire somebody that needed a job coming out of the last forum, and I feel personally responsible that something fell through the cracks. We don't have the resources as an individual institution sometimes, even as an employer, but together we can do more. So with that, I want to thank everybody that's here. You're invested in at least learning as this first step, but I hope you'll join us as community members in continuing this path down that progress of building awareness and then finding solutions for us. So again, thank you for being here, and we'll open it up to just general questions or comments for people in the audience. Thank you. See you guys.
Well, again, Paul, I want to thank you, and I want to thank everyone for being here, and thanks for inviting me, as always, Christine and Charter Rotary. One thing I do want to talk about, I have notes also, but I just want to bring up to date, because some things are happening very, very quickly. You always hear, at least from the law enforcement standpoint when we started, that you can't arrest your way out of this issue or this problem. But a lot of people don't know what that means. And I heard a couple examples of it here today, presentations are made, and I just want to be able to tell, to kind of relate it to that statement. What we hear is that hiring is difficult, especially if someone has a query. So if someone has a criminal record, that becomes difficult in hiring in businesses. And just there's been a lot of criminal justice reform. You probably heard about it. That's come out of the legislature recently. That is changing that. And what I mean by decriminalizing some things that in the criminal world is going to help with that. But Cheryl brought up loss of license, and this is a perfect example of a thing that have changed. Before criminal justice reform 2 years ago, if you were in possession of, say, an illegal substance, one of the consequences was you lost your license. And that was for years, that was the case. That is no longer the case. So that's one example of some of the changes that's happening with the criminal justice reform. So it's not gonna be someone who has a possession case is gonna lose their license, because we realize that loss of license means they can't go for a job. So it perpetuated a problem, it was a consequence that came out of that. The big thing I just wanna know, especially for this area right here, is that we just heard last week from the Framingham District Court that we're gonna have a drug court here in Framingham. Now, that's huge, especially for us who are in the criminal justice, because not everyone in the, I would say, in the, who's a judge believes in them. But we know that in Framingham, Judge Kunis has bought on to this idea, and I think that's going to change the way we handle a lot of these cases in our area. And so that's big for us. Judge Jennifer Stark is going to be in charge of that. She's been to a couple of our forums, and she understands, and she's a partner here. So I just wanted to put that out, especially for businesses. We understand that the criminal justice system in some cases have, because of what we've been doing as part of the overall process, has had consequences in the recovery effort. Cheryl gave a perfect example of what that could be, and that's not an unusual story. So I just wanted to take an opportunity here, because I know this forum is one that wants to embrace this, and I just want to make sure that this forum knew that this is something, especially in the Framingham District Court, that's come to our area. So, thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, so at my urgent care practice, one of the services that we provide to local businesses is drug testing. So as I'm having kind of these conversations with employers and small businesses, sometimes I especially in this tight labor market, right? So some of these conversations I'm having with employers is having a drug testing policy is, well, if I drug test my employees, I'm going to lose half of them, right? So I guess I'm curious as to if you folks have any input to me as I'm having these conversations with companies. How do we kind of overcome these sort of, I guess, it's realistic challenges that businesses have? That I think that somebody mentioned 70% of working employees now could be abusing substance. So how do we? I mean, in order to create a recovery-friendly environment, you have to really know that you have a problem and there are employees that need help, right? So how do you kind of, I guess, start having that conversations and overcome some of those challenges?
Let's dance about it.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
So,
Do you want to go to the mic?
yeah, sure. You raise a really good point, and I don't have an easy answer for it. But I think a start to the answer is that if the employer, is in a very tight job market, really wants this employee, but sees that there is this demerit on the drug testing, the employer needs to make a decision about whether to have a difficult conversation with the employee about what the employer's job expectations are, but also with some compassion and asking the employee whether there are things that the employer can do to help make sure that the employer's expectations are met. We've already talked about transportation, but sometimes the things that the employee needs are relatively simple and can be dealt with pretty quickly. But whether there are any other types of accommodations, whether the employee needs to take some time off from work once a week to go to treatment or to go to an AA type event. So, but that's a difficult conversation. But I think it needs to happen on the front end, because otherwise things are just going to get more difficult on the back end.
You want to go and then?
Yeah, I'll just You could probably all hear me. So this is, I appreciate you bringing that question up. This is something that Katie and I chatted about in advance because we knew that this was one of the questions that was going to come up. And I think speaking to Tim's point, I don't think there's necessarily a perfect answer, but I think he kind of hit the nail on the head when we talk about making sure that there are clear expectations for those employees, right? That there is, things are laid out that detail under what circumstances a drug test may be used, so that it's not necessarily, and of course, safety on the job, if there's any sort of irresponsible or unsafe behavior, that needs to be dealt with, I think, swiftly and appropriately. But that drug testing is technically a best practice measure that can be used as part of a larger conversation with that employee. But there needs to be a lot of other changes, I think, that need to take place first, so that the employee doesn't necessarily see that it needs to be punitive, right? That drug testing is a measure to ensure safety and to ensure that that person is getting the support that they need. So again, I think if I was kind of looking, if I was a business owner and I was looking at revamping some of my policies to be more recovery friendly, I would definitely have that on the list, because I think for liability and safety reasons it's necessary in a lot of businesses, but I would put that at the end of the list. I would check off a lot of other boxes before I get to that point to say, what do our drug testing measures need to look like? And that the answer doesn't need to be punitive. It doesn't need to be, you know, I have a reasonable suspicion that you may be under the influence, I'm gonna drug test you, but that maybe the drug test comes back positive and the next step is not, you're fired. The next step is, it seems like we need to have a conversation about how you can get some support, because this behavior is not appropriate. We cannot have this in the workplace, and then maybe there's some kind of next steps that would allow that employee to maintain that job. And Cheryl stepped out, but this job is available to you if you get help. So again, I think that there's some best practice around how to mold policies and procedures around that very issue. So again, I think certainly a complex situation that I know employers are really needing to consider carefully to protect their businesses, but also be supportive of their employees. And keeping an employee, I think we all know the statistics, right? That turnover, you want to retain employees because it's better for business. So there's some potential options there. Thank you.
Christine, sorry, before you if I may, just to clarify the question, you know, I guess I heard it from a service provider perspective. How do you get the employer to overcome objections about wanting to test?
Right, well, I mean, a lot of them actually don't, I mean, especially small to medium-sized businesses, they don't have a robust abuse, testing policy, right? So they do view it as punitive, right? So if you are on drugs, you are fired or you are suspended, right? So how do we, I guess, kind of bridge that gap and kind of create an awareness and culture within, I think, the business community that, hey, we have a role to play in terms of creating that recovery-friendly environment.
Absolutely. So one proposal, and again, for people in the room, join us. Let's create a group. Let's look at it, because I'm now wearing my product marketing hat. We need a sales kit. We need something that allows you as a service provider, that allows an HR professional internally to sell the need for drug testing, and for small businesses to understand, whether we promote it through the SBA, the Chamber, and so forth, that there are resources available, and it's not necessarily a punitive measure. So it's education, and I think having the right talking points and maybe this link of resources is a starting point. Well, I'm putting all these materials on our website, and we'll push it to our members as a starting point. Mark?
I think.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mike.
Yeah, my name is Andy Bennett from Land Human Resources, as Paul mentioned earlier. The very last word you said, I was going to talk about is education, because I think Bing's concern is a valid one that I see a lot of times with companies. The companies I deal with are small to medium companies also, and they don't have an HR department. That's why they use companies like mine. And one of the things that I'm committing myself to after this, I saw this as a real call to action, is to develop some workshops to bring to small businesses, working hopefully through the Chamber to do the small business. I always get the small business toolkit series, workshops in there as well. But more importantly, I think that we need to look to the experts in the area. In the small business world, for example, I was just texting with my daughter-in-law who's an LADC, licensed alcohol and drug counselor, among other things. She's a psychotherapist. And my brother is a recovering substance use. No, not abuse. Substance use. Yeah, I had to memorize my forgot. But using people like that in the workshops that I'm going to offer, I think goes a long way, because those experts can really kind of bringing it home to the small employee. But I think the ultimate answer, Ben, is educating, not necessarily the HR staff, because my clients don't have an HR staff. I'm kind of their stand-in. But to educate the business owners and key managers about the problem, because it is a huge problem, and it's the one that we can't run away from.
Awesome. I love the call to action.
Yeah.
Well, and to reinforce that, and the people that aren't in the room right now, what makes it challenging, 7:30, and I think you brought it to heart, Mark. Small businesses are busy running their business. You know, this is a huge challenge. Even at the Chamber of Commerce, getting people out to meetings is probably the single most difficult challenge is the time. And so being in front of it, working through our affiliate groups like the Rotaries, working through community organizations, our public municipal resources, other small businesses that might have a better sort of avenue to that. But again, this is to me about this notion of the chamber is the business, right? We are a coalition of the willing that come together for greater good as businesses. Let's extend that. But to me, that's an important step is bringing the right people together for those meetings. Yeah, Mike.
Thank you. I have maybe an observation, a couple observations that maybe lead to a question, and some of the observations you may realize why my son calls me Captain Obvious. So Katie talked about promoting a culture, and we know that stigma is real and alive and well. And I'm just thinking, you know, businesses, it makes so much sense, and it's so obvious why they're the next frontier, how much time we all spend at our place of employment, how important it is to have a job, to, you know, the support that it provides in terms of resources and access to benefits and all of that. But businesses, not all of them are necessarily equal in terms of their level of courage, and I think we need to recognize that if the stigma is out there, then the businesses are aware of that as well, and they need to know that they can overcome and get to a point where they feel comfortable taking a position or being seen as visible to both their customers, their shareholders, the people who patronize these businesses, that in creating a culture or a workplace that's hospitable to recovery is sending a good message, and as much as maybe they're concerned with who they might not make happy with that sort of messaging. So I guess I'm wondering, you know, what can we do more to ask the customers? We're here as sort of people in government and civics and the business community, obviously sort of talking about amongst ourselves what we can be doing, you know, in the business community. But what can we do to have the businesses hear from their customers, the people who actually spend the money at these businesses, to say to the businesses, we want to see you doing more of this, even if they hear from one customer. It could be perhaps an award that they're given, that a business is given for creating this culture, gets their name in the paper, a picture in the paper, receiving an award. It's great PR. Other businesses see that and envy it, and then say, well, I want that sort of positive attention, and sort of taking it from there organically from the customer and the community at large speaking to the businesses. What can we do to help kind of jumpstart that more? That was sort of a piece of the discussion I didn't hear more about getting the businesses to talk to the people in this room and the peers and their peers about this is what we want to see more of.
I love that idea.
I think it's for you to answer, right?
That works for me. Well, I'll go on record right now. So one of the things we're changing actually this year for our awards gala, historically the Chamber of Commerce at its annual meeting has presented a series of different awards. This year we're not going to be doing it in the volume that we have because we decided it's important to showcase these award winners at different points during the year. We've not had an award like that, but maybe a community spirit award or community leadership award that's focused on elements such as investments in employees and investments in community-based solutions is a way that we can approach that. So without defining the award, because I have to go through our membership and our board to look at this, but I think there's an opportunity for us as a community of businesses to recognize each other and recognize those partners. So you know, I'll pledge to work with some of those services organizations in the room and other businesses to define that, and let's create one.
And if we have a good model of a business who's doing good in this arena, having the chamber or the Rotaries or local government asking the public at large to patronize that business.
Absolutely. We're doing it, you know, for the sake of education. The Chamber's partnering with two other organizations next year, the YMCA and the Framingham Rotary, to have a golf tournament department focused on educational initiatives. Why don't we do the same thing for workplace, recovery-friendly workplaces and social impact? You know, there are many organizations that are working in silos about this, but if we can bring multiple organizations together to create that, I think it's a wonderful idea.
And that's actually part of that's part of the recovery-friendly workplace model that New Hampshire has, that Rhode Island has a iteration of, is businesses that choose to participate in that program. They get education, they get training, and there's other tools that they get and supports, but then they also get that seal of approval, right? And I don't know if it's from their, you know, the local chamber, but they get something to put on their window to say, we are a certified recovery-friendly workplace, so that customers can patronize those places because they know that they're dedicated to that model, right, of serving the community, of providing that recovery-friendly workplace. So I think your point is an excellent one, that there should be some sort of incentive for businesses to participate as part of a larger community to do their part with this problem. So thank you for that point.
And one question, Kelly, I think that's wonderful, but I also think that looking from an employer perspective on one side, but also looking at the humanity of what we're dealing with, I think that incentives are great, but I think at the end of the day, I see a lot of similarities here that I'm wondering if you folks may be able to take off of. I actually work with a group at Milford Hospital that's really starting to undercover really like a transgender issue. And when we talk about that, it's really about respect. It's about understanding people's differences. It's about understanding people's problems. It's really about inclusivity. So a lot of those things may be able to help with some of that piece. But at the end of the day, it's about the cultural competence of workplaces to be able to deal with those. And I think when you say it's complicated, I think you're understating it a little bit. Because I think that, you know, you have to get even beyond your owners. You have to get to a society and to these managers who are dealing with these people every day. And whether it's opioid addiction, whether it's other addictions, whether it's just their problems, it really is about that cultural competence, but giving people and employers the resources that can say, here's how we can help. And also work with them more on being able to give that toolbox. Because I think the toolbox from Blue Cross, I think that's great. But I also think what I heard from Dr. Duckworth was, you know what, we've eliminated the barriers. We've been able to do this and this and this and this. And I was actually surprised by that. I was surprised that those great things have progressed. So part of that's about getting that word out too. So I hope that will kind of offer some ideas. Maybe it will accelerate that track a little bit from learning from some of these other initiatives that may be helpful.
No, hi, my name is Eileen, and I'm a founding member of SOAR Native. And my question is for Dr. Duckworth. When you mentioned that Suboxone and methadone is now covered basically under Blue Cross, or there's a co-pay for it?
It's always been covered.
So
We've made it easier and easier to access.
Okay, so my question is, where does Blue Cross stand on Vivitrol? Vivitrol seems to be where recovery is heading. Wellesley is on the cusp of opening a detox facility, believe it or not. I was at the meeting. And it's exclusively for Vivitrol. And the argument was that it can't be abused or resold or anything, unlike Suboxone and methadone. I'm not dissing those two items, but I just noticed Vivitrol, they're not accepting insurance at this new detox, but should they accept insurance, Vivitrol is very expensive. It actually typically has a better success rate.
So there's 3 medication-assisted treatments, right? Suboxone is the most commonly employed, methadone and Vivitrol less so. Of the 10,000 people in the Blue Cross orbit who have addiction, vulnerabilities with opiates, 65, 63% of them get medication-assisted treatment. Just to put this into some perspective. Most of them are Suboxone. Vivitrol is really expensive. I'm doing an actuarial analysis. What would it take for us to eliminate the copay for Vivitrol, which is now about $50, depending on your plan. As employers, you get to decide a lot about what you pay, what you charge your employees. This is one of my great learning lessons from being in a health plan for the first time, is that when I go to Dunkin' Donuts, the first question is, of course, do they have my favorite drink? The second question is, who designed their mental health and substance use benefits? Because, which I never thought before. Because does this person have access to teletherapy? Do they have a zero copay for methadone? Do they have things that I think will be progressive beneficial service? It's interesting. The leadership of the giant health employer groups, self-insured groups are bigger groups per square inch. I'm imagining at your Rotary, more of you are fully insured than I get to make up the benefits. So I eliminated the copay for Narcan for the fully insured, which is 1 million people, but the self-insured organizations have to decide. So I think the challenge with Vivitrol, which represents about 10% of our MAT, but it's appealing because it can't be misused, it doesn't have a street value, and it's essentially Narcan long-acting. It blocks your receptors in your brain.
And you don't have to go every day for the treatment.
Once a month, you get an injection. Yes, we're on the same page. So it's an interesting question. It's really expensive, and so that represents a challenge. I haven't yet gotten that to a zero copay, but I think most of the copays are about $50. So $50 once a month. The elegance to that is that you only go once a month and you only pay one time. So I'm in favor of Vivitrol as a concept. It is harder to start someone on Vivitrol than on Suboxone, because if you're halfway through Vivitrol, like it's a little more medically complex.
Right.
But I guess the answer is we're in favor of all medication-assisted treatments. We've made them easier to get. Massachusetts has the highest state percentage of all the Blue Crosses of the country of people getting MAT. And so I think that's intentional. I mean, that's what we're trying to do. But I'm interested in, what you're seeing on the ground as well.
Well, just the fact that we're going to have something in Wellesley. There's very few doctors in this area that even provide the service.
Right.
I have a friend whose son passed away, and he was going to like Rhode Island just to get his treatment.
Right.
So the fact that it's not even accessible is a whole separate issue.
Well, and also, I was just gonna add to that, also a member, so we're not a family member, but starting an organization similarly in Framingham. But while you're looking at Vivitrol and the copays or whatever else you're looking at, 30 days is too long of a time between treatments of the Vivitrol shot. It tends to wear off before the 30 days are up.
Well, that's a clinical call. And so if the doctor wanted to give it 22 days.
No, but the insurances won't pay. Doctors can write it earlier, but insurances won't pay for it. They only
Not
pay.
us.
Okay.
All I can say is, all I'm responsible is for my
Okay,
team. And I have heard the
That's good to
feedback
know. That's good to
more
know.
than once that we might be outliers in a good way.
Okay, so you will
I have
pay
a
as long
feeling
as
someone in the
insurance-
pharmacy department will chat with the doc. Does this person need this for under 30 days? I don't run the pharmacy department, but I'm actually going to contact Tom Kowalski and ask him that question.
That's a good question.
Because my working assumption is because we're progressive on so many things, we're progressive on that, but I'm going to find out, thanks to your call. I changed the Narcan copay. I went to an event like this, and somebody yelled at me, "Why is your copay so high?" And I said, "Where do you work?" And she said, "Major world famous hospital." I'm like, you set your own copay, right? That's up to you. But then I went back and I evaluated our fully insured copays. So questions are good.
Yeah.
Every time you go somewhere, you learn something. I'm now going to learn the answer to my question. I've given an answer, which is an article of faith. But if it isn't true, I'm going to make sure it becomes true.
Well, great.
Because that's a very reasonable point. Clinicians should decide the right thing for the patients. The health plan shouldn't be making decisions based on the clinical needs of the person. The person taking care of the person should have the right to make decisions. It's my firm belief. And I have to run in a moment. Is any?
I want to remind everybody in this room, too, that the 4 communities that are in the MOPSI group got a tremendous, generous grant from the Metro West Health Foundation. We all have a supply of Narcan. I'm not disagreeing with anything that's been said in this room. But if there's somebody that really needs Narcan, We do have people that in every one of those health departments that have gone through the trainer course. We do have people available to, we not only do the training, but we dispense Narcan to people that really need it free of charge in a confidential, stigma-free, judgment-free setting. So anybody that you know that needs it within those 4 communities, either that lives in those 4 communities or works within those 4 communities, and as far as the businesses that are in those 4 communities, we would love to get in to help you if you need the training in your businesses. We can't get in until we're welcomed in. So please invite us, we will provide the training for you. So again, the 4 communities, Hudson, Framingham, Ashland, and Natick. We were the first ones to do it. It was a pilot program. We were the first health departments in the entire state to do this, and thank to the Metro West Health Foundation for funding it. So thank you very much.
Thank you everybody for coming this morning. I encourage you to talk to Tanya Snyder from Interface to get some more resources about that free referral. And we will be following up with all of you. And I'm so grateful for all of our guest speakers, and thank you so much.